Hi, Harald.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm great here in Amsterdam. And how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for joining me today. I know that you've been quite busy for the past few weeks. So I appreciate your time, and I can't wait, to have more overview of what's happening here on the market. So would you like to tell us a bit more about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I'm an ESG and sustainable finance advisor, as I said, based in Amsterdam. I have had a pretty long career working in financial services, asset management firms, where I started in strategy and gradually gravitated towards ESG. And last year, I basically started my own firm, and also recently joined the University of Zurich CSP, which is a Center for Sustainable Finance and Private Wealth, as a senior fellow.
Thank you. Amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So I understand that you have both on the practical side and a more theoretical side. What's happening? What's happening with the ESGs? What do you see on the market? What's happening?
Yeah, well, there's so much happening. We can take this in a lot of different directions. I think one of the things that I find most encouraging, and it's also one of the reasons that I ended up joining the University of Zurich guys, is that there seems to be much more interest in looking at evidence-based approaches in ESG and sustainable finance. And basically that means, evidence can be different things, but basically it means academic evidence, so that I think we've been looking at what's coming out of the academic community over the last couple of years, and there's a lot of really interesting research happening there. But until now, really, there hasn't been all that much. There hasn't been all that much interest in the practitioner community in looking at these insights and also figuring out how do we implement them, which is also because sometimes the insights are basically telling us that the stuff we've been working on isn't actually working, and so is maybe not worth working on. So that requires a bit of a sort of change of mindset. But at the same time, I think when I look around me, conversations that I'm in, also discussions I'm having with my clients, at the end of the day, people say, look, we want to do this to actually make a difference. So let's learn from what we now know about what's working, and let's try to implement that. And so that's, I think, an exciting new direction that we're all taking.
Yeah, I mean, we hear a lot about greenwashing, a lot about companies using ESGs as a marketing tool, and I'm trying, always to try to understand from their point of view how they understand in terms of decision making, but also understanding the biases that we see, all along the processes. What is worth, and you mentioned that, and what is less. Who is today capable or have the legitimacy to say what's good and what's less, on one side in the company, but also on the academic side?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a really good question, but it's very hard to answer because the whole greenwashing discussion, I think, can be a little bit confusing, because it often hides the fact that people have different reasons or different motivations for engaging in ESG or impact investing or sustainable finance or whatever you call it. And so if we talk about greenwashing, it sort of assumes that at some point we're going to agree on some objective standard, and there will be consensus on this, that this is what constitutes a sustainable investment or an ESG fund. I don't think that's going to happen, for the simple reason that different people have different views on, first of all, what constitutes sustainable or sustainability.
Right.
Just look at the conversation around the taxonomy over the last couple of weeks. People can't agree on stuff like nuclear and gas. But also people have different motivations. And so I think there are three objectives generally. And that's also an encouraging thing, that increasingly I'm hearing people, talk about this and recognize this. So The three motivations can be values alignment. So you're looking for investments that are just, aligned with your values. You're not investing in specific things that you don't like tobacco or weapons, for example. But it's more a question of being able to sleep at night. So it's just knowing you're not associated with those companies. Doesn't really mean you're necessarily changing anything. It's pure values alignment. Then the other thing could be financial returns or risk management. So you're doing ESG integration or some approach involving ESG stuff with a view to generating higher returns or managing financial risks. And then the third objective could be impact, or as it's called today, impact, which is basically solving problems, using finance to solve problems and to achieve change that otherwise wouldn't be achieved. And these three things are also completely different. So I think that's why it's encouraging that people are now talking about this distinction more. But that also means, if you want to know if something is greenwashing, you first have to figure out what was the actual goal or the purpose of the investment or the client. And only then can you say, okay, was there any kind of, misinformation or mis-selling or over-promising? So I do find greenwashing to be, a somewhat unhelpful concept. And I prefer to talk about, the problems that we're trying to solve and then figuring out how do we use finance and investments to contribute to that.
I see a lot of companies, and we see that also online and on social media channels in terms of exchanges. A lot of companies are struggling in the right way with whatever they name in terms of approach about carbon zero, net zero, whatever you name it. And I think that as of today, we need to I think best to outline whatever the company can embed and how they can behave in sort of community and sharing, and what they can and what they're capable of and what they cannot do. And I think that here there are a lot of folks out there trying to understand through technology innovation, but also processes in terms of mindset, how they can approach these fields. And my question here is much more about how do we connect the dots? Who and why should we take a certain direction or adopt a certain policy if there is no R&D behind, no data analysis? How do we construct? How do we build and conceive the next processes? That should be the pillars of everything.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Great question. I think that's the essence of our challenge. And I think that's also, there's already been a lot of learning, and I think, sort of a change in our mindset and how we look at ESG and sustainability. I think your question also suggests that we should go further, because we are just now starting to recognize that most of the problems we're trying to solve are really systemic issues. And so there's only so much that individual companies or individual investors can do to fix those problems. So should we all look at our energy consumption and travel a little bit less or switch to electric vehicles? Yes, of course we should do that, but let's not pretend that is going to fix the problem of climate change. If you look at what the climate experts have to tell us, we'll realize that it's more stuff like government policy, industrial policy. It's a carbon tax or at least some form of carbon pricing. It's stimulating investment in new technologies that today are not really investable for most pension funds, insurance companies, or retail investors. So that means we have to figure out how do we get those different parties sitting at the table together. So it's the government, it is industry representatives, it is investors, it is academics, it is NGOs and so forth. And in some industries you do have platforms for collaboration like that, and we have to, I think, find them and try to contribute to those rather than reinventing the wheel. But in some industries we do not have those platforms. So that, I think, if we really want to contribute to solving those problems, we have to create those platforms.
Yeah, indeed. And this is precisely what I've been trying to explain, for the past few weeks through, new development, new business models. trying, to explain to most stakeholders that can also have their point, in terms of evolution in any type of environment. But my point here today, and I'm trying, every week to design a frame of what's happening and how we go further. And I can't really find any pattern from one week to the other about similarities. It goes everywhere. We have conversations, that go from 0 to 100. And it's like, if we want to set up and envision what's about the near future, what is the most important thing to do as of today?
I think it is to recognize that that public policy has a very important role to play. I think one of the things I'm always very surprised at is that in the world of ESG and sustainability, there are very few people who really are calling for a more proactive role of governments, which is strange because we're talking about collective problems like poverty, climate change, disease, education, and so forth. And when we set up our society or societies, over the last couple of 100 years, the basic agreement that we had was that to solve collective problems, we should organize collective action. That's effectively what government is. And I understand people often dislike government because politicians are politicians, and they take your money through the form of taxes, and I understand all that stuff. But I think we've kind of gone overboard a little bit in the sense that a lot of people see government as sort of the enemy. And obviously there's been a narrative coming from corporations saying, hey, we're big and we're powerful and we can, contribute to this as well. And actually I think they have maybe overpromised a little bit in the sense that now a lot of people believe that to solve these collective problems, we should be looking at corporations. So I think obviously that's great. If corporations can help, that's fantastic, but let's not discount the role of governments. And so that I would say is really the number one issue that we really need to kind of reframe this whole dialogue and in some cases really restore trust in government.
I've been thinking a lot about the governments, the politicians, also the corporations that I'm in touch with, and I see a lot of innovation. I'm living here in Israel. We have in the country a lot of technologies and diverse innovation. And my point here is that I do believe that the startup sphere can contribute a lot in terms of reducing our footprints and whatever. How do we connect the dots? Again, I mean, it's kind of difficult because you mentioned earlier that we should need new platforms and new formats, but I don't see any type of institutions providing with the services and the tools for the new innovation. We speak about innovation in the tech field, but we don't see, others that should contribute, that can contribute to the evolution of these policies. So, I mean, how can we do? What's the thing that we should do?
Well, I mean, so if it were easy, it would already be done. So I'm not going to claim I have all the answers, but one of the industries I've been looking into actually for one of my clients is the shipping industry, and it's interesting because the shipping industry is one of the most polluting. I think it contributes something like 3% of global emissions, which is approximately the same as Germany or Thailand or a large country. So it's a significant issue. It's also mostly the large container ships use bunker oil, which is a particularly polluting type of fuel. And it's not very easy to change that because, these huge container ships are not going to run on solar panels anytime soon. But one of the interesting things about the shipping industry is that they do actually have a lot of institutions that already bring together the different actors in the industry. So the large shipping companies, the freight forwarders, the regulators, the NGOs. And so there has been quite a lot of both sort of regulatory action as well as voluntary action that has come about because of this collaboration and these frameworks and UN treaties that are already in place. And it's been interesting to talk to people in that industry because they often assume that that's normal and that you have this in other industries as well. I've been observing this and have pointed out that that actually might be somewhat unique and maybe something other industries can learn from. But then really to your question, because it's always the issue is like, okay, yeah, we need, platforms for collaboration, but what does it really mean for me, right? So I run a company or I work for a company, and what can I do? I think it's really a question of, company leadership in any industry to encourage the people who work for them to really reach out proactively and offer expertise and time and resources. Often sustainability efforts are well-intentioned, but are very much sort of internally oriented. And so, as I said earlier, it's also important that we reduce our own carbon footprint, that we work on diversity in our own companies and so forth. But that's not going to contribute very much to this, to these systemic issues. So if you really want to make a contribution, then encourage your staff to spend a day every year, if not longer, sitting on a working group on one of these, industry associations and contributing to effective public policy. That's the type of thing I think we should like to see much more of.
It's indeed, and I just want to emphasize on what you said. I think it's no more an external problem for the companies. It's like internal, and we need to see how most companies can embrace the fact that an external challenge can become a great opportunity, business opportunity for the company. It's quite complicated to do that. I know. I have been evolving in that field for many years already. One last word. How do you see today the world post-crisis? What's the next step? on a positive note, please.
On a positive note, well, I mean, sometimes it's hard to remain positive because we're just hopefully coming out of one crisis. But now I was just listening to a podcast this morning about inflation. So that's looking like that might be the next challenge or crisis that we have to deal with. I think, I'm relatively optimistic about all this stuff, looking at the sustainability or the ESG challenges that we have in front of us, because it's been interesting since I've been involved in this. There's been a number of points in time where there were other crises to deal with, financial crisis or now COVID, where people said, let's hope these ESG issues don't all of a sudden drop to the bottom of the agenda. And that has not happened. And so, in fact, it's actually gone even higher on the agenda. So I find that very encouraging. I think it shows that people really do understand that we have to find solutions to these problems. And also, as we've been discussing here, I think we're really learning. So we are getting better at this. And I'm very optimistic that also looking over the challenges we have faced over the last 300, 400, 500 years, and we've made such a lot of progress. I think we can, what's in front of us now, we can do as well, as long as we continue to focus on evidence based approaches and work together where people have expertise and are willing to contribute.
Thank you. Excellent.
All right, you're welcome.